So this is not the next video I was planning to do, but I came across this and I just felt the need to share. Somebody shared this ad on Twitter, and it says, hypnotize with any TV set, first evening or money back. Television repairman's accidental discovery makes anyone a hypnotist right away. Secret method uses ordinary TV set. No electronic knowledge needed, no prior hypnotic training needed, blah, blah, blah. And when I saw this, immediately I was like, well, that's probably real. And then obviously the more skeptical, logical part of myself took over and said, you should probably verify that that's not pop art or some other made up thing. And so I went to the newspaper archives to try to find this ad. And I started my search in the 40s when TV first became a thing, and kind of set the search to the 40s and 50s to start. And I did not find this ad anywhere, although I did find it later. It actually came out of a comic book. So there you go. It came out of a comic book, but not even the point. Because what I did find instead was this and versions of this article all over December 1946, talking about how BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the government-owned BBC, was going to bar television hypnosis because it was too effective. And this was all over the papers, all over the country in around December 20th and 21st, 22nd, 23rd. It was talked about for a good week in 1946. So the ad I couldn't find, but this I did. And I just want to show this to you. So apparently the BBC announced that it had so successfully experimented with hypnotism by television that the feat would not be tried on a general broadcast. The experiment was carried out on a closed circuit, not publicly televised this week by Peter Casson. That's the guy that got to do the hypnotism. In the first test, because there was more than one, a dozen volunteers from the BBC staff subjected themselves to the hypnotist, and 5 of them went into a hypnotic sleep. In the second test, Casson made a direct attempt to hypnotize 6 persons watching the screen in a darkened room, and 4 of them went to sleep. And in the fashion of the day, this is an AP article, but it was reprinted everywhere, and different headlines everywhere, and different little factoids were left in and out. So this is a truncated, tiny version of this article from the St. Louis Star and Times. This is from the Lewiston Daily Sun. BBC finds hypnosis by television works. Test puts staff member in trance. Shudder at possibilities. And they go through the same basic information, but they give a little bit more. They say, one member of the cheerful dozen of the staff who assembled to see if they could be put to sleep by television over a private wire suddenly snoozed and dented his chest with his chin. Another yawned and went into the same sort of trance. A third looked hard at the television screen, but before anyone could prop him up, he sank limply into dreamland. So did 2 others. It was then that the scary possibilities of the thing shook the government-established BBC. Really, it was then that they were like, oh, you know what? This is maybe not a good thing. I mean, why do you think they tried it in the first place? Come on. My goodness, said an official, if you can hypnotize people by television, think of what would happen if everybody had a television set, as everybody will shortly. And a Hitler sort of fellow started working on them all. He refreshed himself from a decanter and said, brr, and made it clear that he must not be quoted by name. I mean, he explained that if you could somehow get control of a nation's television transmitter, you could put everybody to sleep and just walk in, and why, the atom bomb would be years behind the times as a secret weapon. It's very dramatic. At least it's written very dramatically. Hitler seemed to do it without television, but suppose some other country, M dash, ... Seriously, though, he said, because of the success of this experiment, BBC was afraid of the consequences of hypnotizing viewers who might not have anyone at hand to wake them up. Because it goes on to talk about how this Casson guy, the hypnotist, he had to wake some of these people up personally because they would not be roused by other people.
Walking, eating, driving, or engaging in other activities while asleep without remembering it the next day have been reported. Abnormal behaviors may include aggressiveness, agitation, hallucinations, or confusion.
Here's another version of the article out of the Muncie Evening Press. Several watching television made hypnosis victims. The BBC announced they experimented with television. And this one has another interesting point, that one person in a party watching a television screen in a darkened room across the corridor also fell under the hypnotic influence, although Mr. Casson was not then addressing the viewing audience. So whatever was going on with these TVs in this test, it had such an effect that somebody was watching it across the hall and went into a hypnotic state without Mr. Casson even talking. And then they say because of the success of this experiment and the danger of hypnotizing viewers who might not have anyone to wake them up, it's now been decided that hypnotic television broadcast would not be advisable. This is out of The Guardian, December 21st, 1946. It says, the BBC, it appears, has decided not to put hypnotism into its television program. I mean, it makes it sound like they were sitting around going, well, what are we going to do with this new TV that everyone's about to have? Well, what do you think about hypnosis, guys? Like, it just sounds like that was the whole idea. Like, that's why it was created. I mean, this was one of the first things they tried. And by the way, before I finish showing you these other articles, really quick, I just want to point out, this is an article called The History of Television. It comes from Grolier Encyclopedia, and it's up on nyu.edu website. And it notes here that before 1947, the number of U.S. homes with television sets could be measured in the thousands. So that's hardly anybody. That's just your very early adopters of this technology. And I guess the people who could afford it, I have not looked up how much televisions cost at the time, but not very many people had a TV before 1947. And in fact, this article goes on to say full-scale commercial television broadcasting did not begin in the United States until 1947. So in 1946, hardly anyone had a television. And that is when they were doing these experiments. So this version of the article goes on to say that the experiments were too successful. And it says, before anybody gaily protests that BBC officers are notoriously half asleep already or complains that its television staff must be so overworked that it drops off on the slightest provocation, let it be agreed that drowsiness is easily fostered by the effect of a rhythmic pattern on the eye. Even a windscreen wiper will do it, as drivers of motor cars know to their annoyance. Add a readiness to relax in the soothing voice of the hypnotist, and the rest is a recognized psychological process. Just how far the instructions of the hypnotist can then influence the dream or actions of the sleeper depends on the degree of hypnosis and the receptivity of the subject. It would certainly be well not to introduce such experiments into a television program. In the first place, it's no part of the BBC's business to send its customers to sleep. In the second, it would almost certainly be accused by someone of having seized the chance to pour the leprous distillment of communism or fascism into the helpless sleeper's ear. So everybody was thinking about the power of this technology and what it could do. And this comes out of the Sioux City Journal. It's their version of it. But they follow it up with a danger admitted here in the U.S. They follow it up by saying the National Broadcasting Company's television vice president, John F. Royal, agreed Friday with British experimenters that hypnotism by television would be dangerous and said the network would keep off the air any performer who might exert undue influence by hypnotic means. Many well-known hypnotists, he said, have offered their services to television, but all such offers have been turned down. Television's ability to capture the attention of its audience is so strong that we feel hypnotism could be potentially a very dangerous and risky thing, Royal said. And following the publication of this, you had newspapers all over the place making jokes about how, shucks, millions of people are already hypnotized by radio, never mind television, they have to be, or they wouldn't sit and listen to all these commercials. Ha ha ha, so funny. And I also wanted to point out that some of them referred to it as hypnotized by radio, even though, like this headline from the Examiner says hypnotized by radio and then says hypnotism by television has been tried on a closed circuit, blah, blah, blah. So then I started to wonder how many other articles of this were put up that were about being hypnotized by radio that were under this same headline to see if there was any further information. And what I came back with actually was that in 1927, they were putting on hypnotic radio shows to see what would happen with hypnotism over actual radio. So here's an appearance by a mystic named Vishnu, and Zenith Radio is promoting it about how they were going to have a live hypnotism show at the Capitol Theater. And this was January 18th, 1927. The next day, January 19th, they reported in the Miami Tribune, Vishnu is successful. She's awake. The famous mystic completed his conquest of putting this woman to sleep for 24 hours and then used the radio to wake her up from the roof of this theater while hundreds of people crowded around to see if it would work. A couple of months later in March, and this is out of the Daily Herald, they announced that they were going to try radio hypnosis as an experiment. Professor will attempt to control 3 subjects in separate points over radio tonight. And this was out of Boston. The practicability of mesmerism by radio is to be decided here tonight. Professor Gerald Fitzgibbon will go on the air promptly at 6 o'clock over Westinghouse stations WBZ and WBZA.
In the case of WBZ Boston, the radio beams are focused inland as well as up and down the coastline to prevent much of its power being lost at sea.
And while his efforts will be directed at 3 subjects, 2 in Boston and 1 in Springfield, there is the possibility, station officials said, that others may come under the hypnotic sway. It says within 2 minutes, the 3 will be in a mesmeric state. Professor Fitzgibbon predicted they will be made to laugh, cry, enter a state of catalepsy, permit 2 full-grown men to stand on their rigid bodies, and then commanded to write surrender. They will return to a normal condition. Commanded to write surrender, just by the way. Then they will return to a normal condition and find that their left arms, which will have been paralyzed through a post-hypnotic suggestion, will function normally again. This came out the next day on March 10th, 1927. Hypnotism by radio tried. Apparently successful test is reported from Springfield, Massachusetts. Subjects respond to commands. An apparently successful experiment in hypnosis by radio was reported from Springfield last night. While psychiatrists observing the effects of the same experiment on 2 men here express themselves as unconvinced of its genuineness. But there's this picture. This one was published March 11th in the Buffalo Evening News. There's this picture of the experiment, and these are the guys here. And it says, an experiment in hypnosis by radio was conducted in Boston and Springfield in the presence of newspapermen and 2 leading Boston psychiatrists with interesting results. 2 men, William Hall and Guy Marshall, received hypnotic influences over the loudspeaker from Springfield, 100 miles from Boston. To all outward appearances, both men were completely under the influence of the radio voice and performed various operations under the direction of Professor Gerald M.P. Fitzgibbons, 100 miles away. Here we see the doctors inserting sterilized needles into the arms of the men who showed not the slightest pain during the experiment. Ugh. Yuck. And while it was being debated in the scientific community whether or not this radio hypnosis was really successful or not, a week later it was reported in the Morning Herald on March 19th, 1927, that a man named Lorenzo McCoy, a building contractor of Red Lion in York, Pennsylvania, said that he was mesmerized by means of radio last Friday night when he followed carefully the instructions of a Professor Fitzgibbons of Springfield, Massachusetts, and claimed that he could not separate his hands, which he had clasped together at the direction of the man at Springfield, until the voice coming over the radio released his hands. It says his son, a husky youth, tried to pull his father's hands apart but could not do so. McCoy says he is thankful that broadcasting conditions were good and that he heard distinctly the command to separate his hands. Because I guess what he's saying is if somehow the radio had gone out or the signal went funky, he might have still had his hands clasped together for however long, since there would be no way to access the command of the hypnotist to release the hands. So that was being reported. And I looked a little bit further, because this now became a rabbit hole. I looked a little bit further into this Professor Fitzgibbons. And they're talking about a man named Gerald Fitzgibbon. who, by the point of the BBC experiments in 46 and 47, he was going under the name Professor Whiz and being hired by corporations like Phillips Petroleum to do hypnosis to auditoriums of 1,000 people who were guests of the Petroleum Corporation, and amusing bankers at the American Institute of Banking dinners. So he was being hired by corporations and institutions to go around and hypnotize large groups of people at the same time that the BBC is doing these experiments on television. And at that point, I was like, why not? So I tried to look this guy up in the declassified CIA documents. I didn't see anything specifically related to him. But what I did find is that in January 1980, you had ex-CIA hypnotherapist Dr. Milton Klein, who was a consultant to the CIA's super secret behavior modification project Bluebird, which is the precursor to MK Ultra. Back in 1950, they were using things like polygraphs, drugs, and hypnotism to try and attain results in interrogation techniques. So he was part of that. He was coming out in January 1980 warning about regulating and limiting hypnosis to health professionals and saying that one of the goals of these experiments to create a hypnotized remote-controlled assassin was entirely possible, though he denied knowledge of any terminal experiments that would have tested these theories. So he's talking about Manchurian candidates. And he's saying, even 30 years later, in 1980, that it's completely possible to do that. It says, Klein claims that given the proper subject and circumstances using hypnosis, he could produce a killer in 3 to 6 weeks. And that it cannot be done by everyone, it cannot be done consistently, but it can be done. And then, in an eerie set of events, that same year, in December, this same hypnotist, Dr. Milton Klein, was hired as an expert by the defense in Mark David Chapman's trial for allegedly firing 5 shots into John Lennon. So he was hired as an expert on hypnotism to try to prove that Mark David Chapman was temporarily insane when he shot John Lennon. The same year that he's giving an interview where he's warning that Manchurian candidates are totally a possible thing. So that was really creepy to stumble upon. Hypnotism by radio was also experimented with, and also apparently with success, back in 1927. So it's not really a surprise that they would do it with the television as soon as they got a television, that would be the thing. And this article came out in the Birmingham News on December 24th, 1946, Hypnotism via Television Now Proved Fact. It says that professional hypnotists in this city were interested but not at all surprised over the success of hypnotism by television as carried out by a British hypnotist in a recent experiment conducted by the British Broadcasting Corporation. It seems, according to a news dispatch from London, the English specialist pre-tested his program before a committee of 6 judges at BBC television headquarters at the Alexandria Palace. Peter Casson fixed his staring eye on the lens of a television camera and suggested smoothingly that all looking go to sleep. All woke up when shaken vigorously. There's nothing at all unusual about this, said Dr. Thomas L. Garrett, president of the Garrett Foundation for Psychological Research, which has done valuable work in restoring World War II victims of battle fatigue by hypnotic suggestion. Hypnotists in this country, myself included, have been practicing hypnosis over the telephone for 25 years. It should be even easier by television. And then they go on to say, like many other articles have gone on to say, that this cannot be done against your will. You have to be a willing participant for this to work. But, I mean, if people are willingly sitting down to watch television, doesn't that mean you're a willing participant? I don't know. I'm just saying. I think the point of this is really just to show that television was not even a thing yet that was widely had by the majority of the population, and one of the first things they were doing with it was to see how effectively it could be used to hypnotize people. and thinking about all of the possibilities of that technology being used in that way. And just for the record, here's this Hypnotize with Any TV Set ad. It's up on Wikipedia Commons, and it states down here that it comes from The Amazing Spider-Man, which was published in 1973. So, and we've talked about this before on this channel over the years, about flicker rates and alpha states and what happens to your subconscious mind. Adds up with this video. Recently, I was looking through some congressional subcommittee hearings, like you do, and apparently they held one on subliminal communication technology, which was held in the year 1984 of all years, and put into the record was a Southern California law review document that mentioned several very interesting points. First, it notes that according to previously classified documents, the CIA was testing subliminal manipulation in movie theaters during the late 50s, and in a document on these studies speculated that subliminal projection can be utilized in such a way as to feature a visual suggestion such as obeyed, deleted. And so I'm not really just going to go back over all the things that I've already said, but they did a lot of experiments in the years after that and during the Cold War, using subliminal suggestion in advertisements and other things to see what the effects would be on people. That's all ground that's been covered. But I came across this article up on Psych Mechanics that's from last year, How TV Influences Your Mind Through Hypnosis. And I just think some of the things the guy said are probably a good way to finish this video. He talks about, would I be exaggerating if I say that a part of your behavior and personality is shaped by the things that you see on the TV screen, on the screen? Definitely not. It's naive to think that television is a harmless pastime activity that doesn't affect your psyche in any way. Every thinking person knows that anything you expose your mind to affects it. Your psyche is continually being shaped by all kinds of information that you receive from your environment, and that includes television, which he calls one of the most effective hypnotic tools out there, that can have a huge influence on the way people think and the beliefs they hold, and that your subconscious mind, which carries all your memories and beliefs and makes you who you are, is directly programmed by watching television. Like I said, we've talked about this before, but your brain can only be surprised by information one time. So if you watch something on TV, that's the one time. That's the one time that information has now gone into your mind and has been, quote unquote, programmed there. I mean, that's what it is. You're not going to be shocked by that a second time. They've done studies with ads, and they found that they really don't need to show you things repetitively. They really only need to show it to you once. And that when you go into a store, your brain is going to recall that one time that it was shown to you. So they really don't have to play you 100 Coca-Cola ads. They just have to play you one Coca-Cola ad. That's all it takes. And he goes on to talk about the flicker-induced hypnotic state that puts people into an alpha state that's commonly associated with deep relaxation. And that your subconscious mind then becomes suggestible under that state. And then all the information you receive in that state just goes into your memory pool. He says, since beliefs are nothing but memories, this information has a tendency to alter your beliefs or form new ones when it seeps into your subconscious mind. You might think the remote is in your hand and you're watching the program, but in truth, you're the one who's getting programmed. Freeing your mind is all about finding out what beliefs you are holding in your subconscious, bringing them to consciousness, and then eliminating the ones that have no compelling evidence or basis in reality. The natural consequence of a hypnotic trance state is that your conscious filters are turned off and you're unable to critically analyze the information that you are receiving. Moreover, when you watch TV, you're not able to do any thinking because information is bombarded continuously into your mind. You get no time to process what you're watching. Your conscious mind is eliminated from the equation, and the information you receive continues to become part of your belief system. And he goes on to talk about how he said that our entire childhoods were essentially a period of hypnosis. If you were born in a time period where there was a television in your house, you were picking up all of this information and all of these belief systems, all of these things that were being shown to you on television in an unfiltered way for many years of your life at the beginning of your life, before you really had concrete reasoning skills and the ability to think about that information at a higher level. So because your conscious faculties weren't fully developed all of that stuff's just going in there, you know? And he says, think about it. If you saw Superman flying around, little kids go and they dress up like Superman and put on a cape and try to fly off their balcony or jump around. They try to do wrestling in their living room, all these kinds of things because they're trying to enact the things that they're learning off of the television set.
This mission is critical. This is a most unusual weapon. It is specially designed for counter-espionage. For training purposes, this special delayed action target comes with it. Get Mattel's powerful Zero-M Sonic Blaster wherever toys are sold. Remember the password, Zero-M.
And he says this is proof that our subconscious minds at that time can't differentiate. Because your mind well, your brain is located inside your skull. It doesn't have direct access to the outside world. So kids are just believing things they're seeing on TV. A lot of kids at age probably 4 and 5 aren't sitting around consciously watching television, critically analyzing what they're seeing, and then going, well, that's a TV, so I got to take this all with a grain of salt, if they even know the phrase grain of salt. And I just think it's an important point to remind people of, because it's 2022 now. We've just been through 2 years of hell, global hell, a lot of us. And when you go out in public, or at least when I do, I'm seeing some people who are walking around right now and they basically look like they are in a trance. They're walking around in a state of trauma. They look traumatized.
Hello, I'm Tab Hunter. Did you know that mental illness claims more victims than any other disease? That's right.
They look scared to even be in public at all. They look afraid to even exist as they're walking around. And I can only imagine what they've been putting into their mind and their subconscious all day long before they get to a point where they're out at the store walking around like that, looking like they have been traumatized. And whatever reality they're existing in with that, I'm not in that reality. And when I see them, I can clearly see that, whatever you want to call it, the multiverse, whatever word you'd like to use, you can see the concepts playing out because I'm not walking around like that. Whatever's been put into their conscious and subconscious mind is causing that response.
I'm hungry!
Is not actually happening in the world around them that I can see. It's as if, it's kind of like watching one of those horror films where somebody is depicted as being possessed and they're walking around seeing all kinds of scary demons and monsters and stuff, and they're freaking out. And everyone around them is just looking at them like, what the hell's wrong with Jennifer? Is she on a bad trip? Like, what is happening? And I kind of wish I could just go up and hug these people because they really do look hurt. They looked harmed. They really do look harmed. And I don't think it's a stunning revelation for most of you when I say that the British Broadcasting Corporation has a long and very cozy, very friendly relationship with the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. There were so many documents in the declassified database featuring the phrase British Broadcasting Corporation. And I don't just mean articles, letters and memos, memorandums, et cetera, et cetera. There were so many things in there. It would take hours and hours for somebody to go through them all. But you really do get the idea that right at the beginning of television, 1947, the first year that it really becomes a thing for most people, they were setting up an informal reciprocal agreement for their worldwide media surveillance through the CIA's Foreign Broadcast Intelligence Service, which just had come under its control in 1946, and the British Broadcasting Corporation, which also has its own monitoring service. And they were extremely friendly about that, to the point that in 1971, somebody wrote this: From BBC London to the director of the Foreign Broadcast Information Service, hearty congratulations to FBIS on attaining such a ripe old age in such good shape, and best wishes for a further 30 years of achievement from the older brother at Caversham. So that's the way they refer to themselves when talking to each other. This was one that came from the CIA's FBIS guy over to the managing director of what they call external broadcasting at the BBC. And this was from 1982. Wishing to extend to you on behalf of the FBIS the warmest congratulations on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the BBC External Services. As you know, for the past 40 years, FBIS, the U.S. government's radio monitoring service through the CIA, and the BBC's monitoring service have shared coverage of the world's radios through mutual exchange and have developed a close and fruitful relationship. We're therefore especially pleased to congratulate you and your staff on this important occasion. And then they go on to say, BBC broadcasters have for half a century been a beacon of information and truth for listeners in every corner of the globe. I'm sorry. Sorry, that's really hard to read without laughing. Anyways, so there you go. And I'm not going to show it, but if you go look up BBC News Countdown, just by the way, just for some irony here, they count people down into their news programs these days with spinning globes and hypnotic swirls. I mean, the jokes write themselves. I'm just saying. It's not really funny. It's actually kind of horrifying if you think about it. But don't worry, because in 1946, they tried it multiple times, and they swore they were never going to do that, ever. And we can trust them, right? They're very trustworthy. They don't have any reason to keep people in trances with information that raids their subconscious mind and traumatizes their psyche or anything like that. So I don't know why you're a conspiracy theorist if you even think anything like that, okay? I just think technology in and of itself is just generally taken for granted. People have not educated themselves on the history of where these technologies have come from. These are military products, television, the internet, computers, all of it, okay? And I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there's a big difference between consciously, critically taking in and analyzing information and just sitting on a couch, letting everything that comes out of a box go right into your head unfiltered to control the reality that your brain projects onto this place. I actually was reading a different article altogether. It was about the atom, and it ended with, "It's a wonderful and dangerous world in which we live today, thanks to science. The danger enters by reason of the fact, as stated above, the creations of science do not have a conscience. Man must supply that." I love you guys. I'll talk to you later.